Discover the amazing journey of the samurai, 10 transformative secrets of feudal Japan revealed. Jack Thompson's fingers trembled as he leafed through the frayed pages, each one whispering secrets of a world long past, a world of honor and righteousness. He was a history teacher in a town where the buzz of disinterest flooded his classroom, drowning his passion for educating. Jack longed for change. He felt like a relic amidst the cacophony of students whose ambitions skewed more toward social standing than personal growth. Today, however, he stumbled onto something captivating: newfound responsibilities ignited within him. Yet, in that flicker of inspiration, anxiety lurked. What if his fervor was met with resistance? What if his efforts to spark interest broached the disapproval of others? The ideals he unearthed from the samurai: integrity, resilience, unwavering loyalty, echoed his professional pursuits. How could they translate to a classroom where apathy reigned? He envisioned his students grappling with life lessons that defied their economic scars, but that vision felt like a naive dream. What if they dismissed him, or worse, turned against him for challenging their status quo? The doubt coiled in his stomach, constricting with every breath he took. These weren't just lessons on historical figures, they were pleas for understanding in a world where their voices often went unheard. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. With every lesson infused with samurai principles, he felt a subtle shift: the curious glances from students, a tentative willingness to engage. Then, like thunder on a clear day, the storm of accusations hit. A powerful voice from the school board targeted him, framing his teachings as threats to an established order. Jack felt his blood run cold. How had his attempts at enlightenment turned into allegations against his character? Would he succumb to the pressure and remain silent, sacrificing his ideals for a mere paycheck? His heart was a battlefield of turmoil. Standing on the brink of despair, Jack's resolve wavered. He could sense the shadows closing in. Each fabricated claim was another dagger in his chest. What if he lost the trust of the few who believed in him? The shame of failing his students clawed at him mercilessly. Still, lingering in the recesses of his mind were the samurai virtues: resilience against tyranny, fighting for the voiceless. He was torn between the safety of conformity and the burden of standing tall for what he believed in. With the school board meeting looming, certainty faded into a daunting fog. Days melted into anxious nights filled with restless thoughts. As he prepared himself for the confrontation, he could only wonder, could his fight for truth reignite the spirit of his classroom, or would it extinguish forever? The threat intensified, leaving Jack on the edge of a decision that could change everything, not just for him, but for the future of each student whose faith he desperately wanted to uphold. Jack sat at his desk, the weight of the impending school board meeting settling heavily on his shoulders. The room felt suffocatingly quiet, a far cry from the vibrant discussions he had tried to cultivate in his classes. As he stared at the empty seats around him, he could almost feel the presence of each student, their unspoken hopes and fears urging him onward. This wasn't just about him, it was about them: the future leaders, thinkers, and creators who needed to see the value in integrity and resilience. Echoing the principles he so passionately admired from the samurai, his mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. Should he defend his teachings, citing the historical significance of the samurai's virtues? Or should he appeal to the personal stories of his students, weaving in how these ideals could reshape their lives? The thought of showcasing their struggles brought a new layer of determination. They deserved to have their voices heard, not just in discussions about their daily trials but within the framework of their education. As the hour approached, Jack practiced in front of the mirror, channeling both the calm of a samurai and the fire of a teacher with a mission. Words began spilling forth, the sincerity of his intent crystallizing his thoughts. He needed to communicate not just facts, but a vision that challenged the mindset of complacency that so often enveloped his school. Arriving at the district office, the stark fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating a space filled with anxiety. Jack could see the board members already seated, their expressions a mix of sternness and skepticism. Each face was a reminder of the formidable obstacle ahead. He took a steadying breath, hoping to draw strength from that flicker of inspiration he had felt when reading about the samurai. This was his moment to rise, to embrace the responsibility he had stumbled upon weeks ago. When he spoke, his voice trembled at first, but gradually the words became more assured. He spoke of loyalty not just to the curriculum or the institution, but to the students themselves. He emphasized the need to elevate their voices, to teach them principles that went beyond mere grades. Still, the resistance was palpable. One board member raised objections, questioning the relevance of samurai teachings in a 21st century classroom. Jack felt the sharp sting of frustration but reminded himself of the unwavering resilience he admired. Despite the questioning and skepticism, Jack laid out specific examples of how his lessons had resonated with his students. He highlighted individual stories of students who had confronted adversity inspired by the samurai ideals of courage and honor. As he spoke, he could almost visualize his students' faces, their eyes brightening with newfound understanding, their struggles transforming into motivations. Yet, the turning point came unexpectedly. A soft voice from the back, the principal, offered unanticipated support, speaking from her own experiences. She vowed to back Jack's initiatives, encouraging a dialogue that could lead to synergy rather than conflict. It was a catalyst. Suddenly, the boardroom buzzed with shifting dynamics. Conversations sprung to life, and heads began to nod. But just as he began to feel a sense of victory, another voice cut through the air. An accusation emerged from the shadows, an unsubstantiated claim that Jack's teachings were damaging and distorting, not just individual outlooks but societal values at large. The room fell silent, tension thickening like fog. Jack's heart raced. This was the battle he'd been dreading. How would he counter this without losing the newfound momentum? Jack inhaled deeply, determination surging within him. The path ahead remained shrouded in uncertainty, but he realized that now, more than ever, he needed to embody the principles he had been advocating for. The moment had come to face not just the board, but the fears that had haunted him. No longer could he hide behind doubt. He must solidify his commitment not just to the ideals of the samurai, but to his students and their potential. Would he find a way to navigate this treacherous terrain and unite the opposition for the sake of his cause? The answer loomed before him, and at that moment, Jack knew his fight was far from over. Jack's mind raced as he felt the weight of the accusation settle around him, a tangible force that threatened to distort everything he had worked so tirelessly to build. The words of the board member echoed ominously, biting at the edges of his resolve. He couldn't afford to falter, too much was at stake. He searched within himself for the calm he would need to navigate this new treacherous reality. As the silence hung heavily in the room, Jack gathered his thoughts, refusing to let the atmosphere stifle him. Resilience wasn't just a theme of his teaching, it was a necessity in this moment. He thought about how his students often faced their own doubts and challenges, how they had sculpted their fears into driving forces. This was no different. He needed to not just defend his approach, but to reaffirm every principle that lay behind it. Stepping forward, Jack spoke with clarity that surprised even himself. "What I teach," he began, his voice steadying, "is not about glorifying an ancient culture but about embracing the ultimate values of honor, courage, and tenacity. These ideals resonate with our students' daily lives, shaping them into resilient individuals who confront their circumstances." He locked eyes with the accuser, a strategic choice meant to display his unwavering commitment. To dismiss this is to dismiss their potential. He could see the slight hesitation on the board member's face, a flicker of unease at the intensity in Jack's gaze. For the next few minutes, Jack leveraged the strength of his own convictions. He spoke passionately about the transformation he had seen in his students, how they used the samurai ethos not only in their academic challenges but in personal trials, from bullying to family struggles. Each story was a testament to the significant impact of his teachings. With every word, he painted a vivid picture of what these lessons meant in the present day, shifting focus onto the students whose lives were intrinsically tied to his philosophy. Imagine, he urged, a student who, in the face of adversity, chooses to step up rather than step back. Aren't we duty-bound to teach them that they have the strength to change their narratives? He could feel the room responding to this shift, energy igniting like flint. A few heads nodded, skeptical expressions began to soften, yet, no sooner had he begun to see the tides turn than the antagonist launched another volley, this time casting doubt on Jack's grasp of the very culture he espoused. The accusation felt like a punch to the gut, each word calculated to undermine his authority and aim at the heart of his mission. Jack could feel anger bubbling beneath his surface, but he kept it contained, knowing that rage wouldn't serve him here. In that moment, a realization struck. He was on trial not just in front of the board, but his very belief systems were in question. The essence of who he was as an educator and an advocate for his students hung precariously in the balance. It was more than defending a curriculum, it was affirming his own identity. He needed to confront the doubts blossoming in his own mind and separate the fiction from reality. Taking one more breath, Jack redirected his focus inward. What had he truly learned from the samurai? Composure, respect, and humility were fundamental, but so was the unrelenting courage to face challenges head-on. He would transform this moment into a breakthrough. We cannot ignore our responsibility to equip our students with values that resonate beyond textbooks, Jack asserted, determination radiating from him. What is education if not a foundation for them to stand on when the world tries to bring them down? With that, Jack understood his next move: the urgency to make his stand personal. He would request the board allow testimonials from students themselves. Their voices, he believed, could shift the tide once and for all, but as he prepared to seize this opportunity, a gnawing doubt crept back in: would the board truly listen to the youth they had often brushed aside? What if this attempt to humanize his cause only fueled further resistance? Standing at the precipice of both his ideals and his professional fate, Jack felt the suffocating tension return. He had ignited the conversation, but could he close the gap between conviction and acceptance? This moment demanded vulnerability as much as it required strength. How could he wield both to ensure that the very essence of his teachings endured? His heart raced as he prepared to ask for the students' voices to echo within those four walls, knowing the risk could either solidify his position or leave him exposed, battling the very beliefs that had once stood so firmly at the core of his pedagogical approach. What awaited him on the other side of this pivotal decision? Jack steadied himself, his hands instinctively meeting at the small of his back as he contemplated the next steps. His heart pounded, but beneath that rhythm, a growing understanding formed. The testimonials could be the lifeline he needed, a way to add authenticity to his claims. Yet the precariousness of his situation loomed large. The boardroom wasn't simply a stage for debate, it was a battlefield. He raised his hand slightly, heart racing as he asked, "Can we invite some of my students to share their journeys and personal experiences?" The request surprised even him, the urgency propelling it forth despite the apprehension that twisted in his gut. Would this crew of gatekeepers truly grant the floor to the very individuals they often dismissed? He braced for the backlash, but before the board could respond, one board member, a middle-aged woman with steely eyes, narrowed her gaze at him. "And what if their narratives don't align with your vision? What if they contradict your teachings?" The question sliced through the air, weighted with skepticism that rattled him. Jack inhaled deeply, recognizing this moment as an inflection point not only for the board's perception of him but for clarity within his own principles. The chance to turn the tides came with its risks. He had spent years constructing an image of what he believed education to be, yet, allowing his students to voice their truths could dismantle the control he exhibited in the classroom. "Every narrative matters," he said, his voice low but firm. "These students are not mere reflections of my teachings, they are individuals shaped by the world in which they exist. To understand their experiences is to enrich our approach to education." Her eyes softened ever so slightly, but Jack sensed the shadows of doubt still flickering in the corners. He needed to drive his point home, he needed to reveal himself and his motivations without drowning in fear. "I teach them to confront adversity," he declared more resolutely, "and in allowing them the space to speak, I offer an opportunity for growth for all of us." Silence enveloped the room, an eerie mix of tension and intrigue suspended in the air. Unfortunately, a sense of vulnerability swept through Jack, exposing the fear that snaked around his resolve. The students were out there, perhaps extending his request would lead to unforeseen consequences. Yet, he couldn't allow fear to dictate his educational philosophy. As not every eye cast his way was positive, he prepared mentally for the fallout. He saw the potential discomfort their truths could cause, a collage of stories that might challenge his narrative. Yet the very essence of the samurai ethos that inspired his teachings was grounded in the courage to stand firm regardless of the storm. Imagine a classroom where testimony becomes our foundation, breaking barriers of understanding, igniting empathy in our students, he continued, coalescing his thoughts into a cohesive vision that he hoped would resonate. That's resilience in action. That's the teaching I stand for. The board's hesitation barely concealed the weight of judgment hanging thick against him. It became increasingly clear that this was not merely about testing his educational integrity, it was about stripping away his fear of vulnerability. For a moment, Jack hesitated, uncertainty knotting in his stomach. Would this plea urge the board to give the students a platform or only expedite his downfall? For exposing the frailties of his teachings, Jack's determination solidified further, reminding him of his purpose. He had a chance to reinforce not only his beliefs but to serve as a bridge for those students who needed validation. However, he was painfully aware that this could just as easily backfire. Would the board listen, or would they see the students as mere anathemas to Jack's carefully orchestrated structure? The atmosphere crackled with unspent energy as he waited, questions swirling relentlessly in his mind. What awaited him on the other side of this decision could either ruin his career or light the path to a newfound respect. And to invite the students was more than about defending his curriculum, it was a daring leap into the unknown realm of shared experiences that bore the potential to redefine the norms of his educational philosophy. As silence stretched, Jack realized he stood at the edge of a precipice, heart hammering with anticipation. The time had come, and he was ready to confront not just the board's skepticism, but the core of his own educational beliefs. What would the students reveal that could challenge everything he had fought for? The boardroom remained eerily silent as Jack's words hung in the air, a delicate thread woven from his hope and resolve. He could sense the tension simmering, each member maintaining their composed facade while their minds churned over his daring proposition. He knew that this moment wasn't solely about gaining approval, it was a journey inward, a confrontation with his own convictions. The impending weight of potential rejection pressed heavily against his chest. One board member finally broke the silence, a burly man with an air of authority. What makes you think your students will contribute anything of value? They're still raw, unrefined in their thoughts. His skepticism was palpable, like a tangible barrier Jack would have to dismantle. Jack clenched his fists at his sides, struggling against the counterpoint that threatened to surface. It was easy to dismiss the students, but he had witnessed their transformation firsthand. Each struggle bore a lesson, a unique map crafted through hardship and triumph. Their rawness is precisely what gives them value. Unfiltered voices can shatter illusions, he replied, drawing on the conviction that had propelled him through countless challenges that he felt paradoxically vulnerable yet empowered. Every challenge he faced in the classroom had hardened his resolve but also made him feel trapped within the confines of expectations. Jack's insistence on the students sharing their truths was not born merely from a desire to succeed but from an urgent need to shift perspectives, not just the board's, but his own. Questions bubbled within him. Had he been too rigid? Had his framework of teaching restricted the evolution of both himself and his students? When had he begun to equate authority with control instead of guidance? Each inquiry stirred deeper self-doubt, yet the vision he painted for a new kind of empowerment etched itself in the backs of his mind. Taking a deep breath, he stood taller in that moment of doubt, a decision crystallizing. It was crucial to emphasize the courage inherent in vulnerability. Allowing students to own their narratives allows us all to grow. Isn't that what education is for? The tremor in his voice subsided as clarity sharpened his articulation. The board's expressions varied from intrigue to disapproval, yet Jack dared to push further. Imagine walking into a space where every student feels seen and heard. Experiencing their resilience firsthand will not only validate their existence but ultimately enrich our institutional framework. A flicker of uncertainty crossed the face of the woman who had questioned him earlier. Jack seized that moment, as if the slightest crack gave him permission to ascend further. I invite my students not merely to support my teachings, but to spark a renaissance in how we view education as a whole. If we can't learn from their voices, what right do we have to guide them? The shift was palpable, a collective intake of breath as the board members exchanged glances. For the first time, he sensed cracks through their concrete opinions. Jack felt adrenaline coursing through his veins, fueling his passion, his resolve ignited. Refusing to back down now, he pressed on. The stakes were far greater than professional affirmation. This was a moment of self-actualization, enlightenment through engagement. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. Teaching was never about molding minds into a single form, but about nurturing the diverse expressions of knowledge each individual carried. Jack balanced his next words carefully. Whatever they reveal might challenge our methods, but isn't that the point? If we aren't willing to adapt, to see beyond ourselves, we're failing our mission. The reactions on the board's faces told Jack everything. He had struck a chord. They were not ready to dismiss him. Yet, he understood the looming uncertainty. The risks associated with this endeavor could lead to uncharted territory, both for him and his pedagogical identity. How would the students react if granted a voice? Would they feel empowered or apprehensive about stepping into that light? Would the board accept those narratives, or would they pathologize them? The meeting was far from over, each second dragging into oblivion as he awaited their decision, wrestling with the reality of his own professional evolution. The anticipation coiled inside him, potent and electric, waiting for release. That he was on a threshold, teetering between fear and empowerment. This was pivotal, an opportunity to not just present an idea, but to redefine what teaching meant to him. What could break through this stubborn reluctance? The moment felt suspended, as if not even time could dare interrupt. Jack's heart thudded with a precarious mix of excitement and dread. If he was going to stand on his belief, he had to prepare for whatever consequences awaited him. So what would he do if they said no? The thought settled like lead in his stomach, but he squared his shoulders and prepared for the impact of his next evolutionary step. Jack knew, inevitably, he was crossing a line. This could either dissipate everything he had worked for or pave the way to profound transformation. And as the board's murmurs began once again, the weight of his journey loomed before him, promising a reckoning he could neither turn away from nor fully embrace yet. But what lay on the other side of this transformative leap remained obscured, beckoning him forward into an uncertain horizon. The murmurs of the board echoed in Jack's ears, a backdrop to the swirling thoughts within. He leveled his gaze at the group, trying to pierce through their hesitant expressions, seeking the spark that would ignite their understanding. The balance of power felt precarious, his conviction trembled on the edge of a knife. What if this moment challenged not just their views but his own deeply held beliefs about education? Before he could spiral into doubt, the man with the imposing presence spoke again. A vision is one thing, Jack. The execution is another. How do we ensure that this doesn't turn into chaos? His voice thundered, a stark reminder that vision alone wasn't enough. The concern for stability resonated deeply. Jack realized that even as he fought for his students, he owed it to his peers to offer them a roadmap through the turbulence. That he could have easily dismissed the question as fear of change, but it made Jack pause. A profound truth began to emerge: authentic empowerment could only thrive within a framework of support and structure. I understand your concerns. Chaos can overshadow good intentions, but think of it differently, Jack began, channeling the momentum he had gained. What if we created a framework that allows for guided freedom? Structured dialogue, mentorship pairings, and workshops. We shape the environment, but the students drive the content. He could feel the air shift, the board's scrutiny transforming into a glimmer of contemplation. Incorporating student narratives isn't about relinquishing control, it's about sharing power and responsibility. It teaches them accountability and gives them insights into the impact of their voices. We can foster critical thinking while also ensuring that they learn to navigate complex discussions. Jack's own journey echoed in his words. He recognized that he, too, had struggled silently under the expectations of a rigid system. This tangle of control and freedom mirrored his path toward self-acceptance, empowerment. He realized, wasn't he just for his students but also for himself. The more he grasped this, the more equipped he felt to lead his students into their uncertain yet promising realms. A woman at the end of the table leaned forward, intrigued. What about the backlash? Some parents may not support this decision. There could be repercussions. Her brow furrowed, highlighting the weight of the dilemma. Jack felt his heart race, an unsettling thought creeping into his mind. What if he opened a Pandora's box? But facing that fear wasn't defeat, it was an invitation to confront the reality of his role. Yes, there may be backlash, and I accept that risk. If we don't prepare our students to face the world authentically, we're doing them a disservice. This is about equipping them to engage in conversations that matter, to advocate for their beliefs even when challenged. He sensed the board members absorbing his words, weighing the implication of his approach beyond immediate repercussions. Each hesitation felt less like resistance and more like an opportunity for deeper dialogue, a space where uncertainty could exist without judgment. Jack embraced that thought, feeling the rush of potential as he outlined a plan to address follow-up communications and community engagement, but just as the tide began to turn, his internal doubts clawed back to the surface. Would even his best strategies hold against likely criticism? The prospect of launching this initiative hung heavily in the air, suspended between acceptance and doubt. Jack clenched his jaw, straightening his spine. He couldn't lose sight of why he was here, both for the students and himself. This was the crucible of his professional identity, a chance to emerge transformed. As his gaze shifted back to the board, he noticed a tightening of their collective body language, an indication that this moment could pivot swiftly. He had laid his foundation, now, it would either hold firm or come crashing down. Yet, he felt an unshakable resonance within him, a quiet certainty that something monumental lay ahead, perhaps not just for the board, or for him, but for education itself. The clock ticked ominously, minutes stretching painfully as Jack awaited the board's resolution, unsure if the liberation he yearned for would emerge triumphantly or falter. The weight of the moment pressed harder, and Jack braced himself for whatever revelation came next, knowing the answer could reshape his life forever. The air crackled with anticipation as the board deliberated, their murmurs a distant hum interspersed with the ticking clock. Jack's heart drummed against his ribcage, a steady reminder of the stakes involved. This wasn't merely a proposal on student empowerment, it was about redefining the very fabric of their educational philosophy. A low murmur from the man with the formidable presence broke the silence. Have you considered the metrics of success? He asked, his brow furrowing with a newfound intensity. How will you measure whether these initiatives lead to genuine progress? Jack felt the question pierce through his earlier momentum, instigating a shift in his focus. In the rush to present his vision, he neglected this crucial aspect. Accountability and adaptability were as essential in his plan as the ideals he championed. You're right, he admitted, forcing himself to remain composed. Metrics should be intertwined with our objectives. We can start with qualitative assessments through student feedback, then weave in quantitative data from their performance in various discussions and projects. An unseen approval flickered across the board's faces. He could see the gears turning now, the acceptance of a new reality beginning to take root. Jack realized he had to harness this momentum, not just to alleviate their concerns but to anchor his vision in robust strategies. Moreover, he pressed on, feeling emboldened, we can establish a committee consisting of students and faculty to consistently review and refine our approach. This community-driven model not only builds accountability, but it also fosters a culture of continuous improvement that can adapt as we learn what works and what doesn't. His words hung in the air, a synthesis of idealism and pragmatism that resonated with the board. He felt his footing solidify as he leaned into the moment. In addressing their doubts with clarity, he felt a shimmering sense of purpose. His vision was taking on a tangible shape, yet, like a lurking shadow, his doubts surfaced again, spiraling away from the boardroom and plummeting toward his internal landscape. He pondered the likelihood of failure. What if the initiative faltered under scrutiny, or worse, what if it alienated students rather than empowered them? The fear of disappointment clawed at him. The very thought felt like betrayal not only to his students who needed this change, but to himself, who longed for affirmation in this new role. Jack inhaled deeply, grounding himself in the realization of what he could control. The classroom dynamic wasn't the only facet of his life that required courageous engagement. He had stifled his own voice for too long, allowing hesitation to overshadow potential. Reflexively, he recalled the moments where he had risen against the current, examples of his own educational evolution fueling an ember of determination within him. Let us also not forget about the professional development for faculty, he proposed with renewed vigor. Creating a series of workshops aimed at building conversational skills, handling difficult discussions, and understanding diverse student perspectives can equip our educators with the necessary tools to navigate this transformation adeptly. Gradually, the tension around the table shifted. Board members leaned in, exchanging glances that hinted at approval. Jack had chipped away at their rigid outlook, crafting a vision that intertwined their concerns with genuine pathways for growth, but just as hope surged, a new voice emerged, slicing through the atmosphere like a blade. And if after all this, the parents push back harder than we anticipate? A particularly astute member tried to don a cloak of skepticism. What then? Every ounce of courage he had summoned wavered, a sudden convergence of fear and resolve tightening around his throat. This wasn't simply a professional endeavor anymore, it was deeply personal, a clash of his ideals against the daunting possibility of backlash. The dreaded scenario of facing an onslaught from the parents, the accusatory looks, the probing questions. It felt like walking on a tightrope without a safety net. Yet another realization washed over him, invigorating him anew. Confronting these challenges head-on was the essence of empowerment. If he truly believed in student agency, he could not allow the fear of repercussion to dictate his choices or stifle the very change he sought to inspire. Each student deserved a champion, and perhaps at this moment, that champion could also be himself. Gazing around the table, Jack made a decision. If we face backlash, then we engage with the parents directly. We open the channels of communication and educate them about the changes we're implementing. We invite them into the process, harnessing their concerns into constructive dialogue. He felt the quintessence of his convictions crystallizing, ready to stand not just as an educator but as an advocate. The room grew quiet again, the tension palpable, teetering on the brink of collective action. Unbeknownst to Jack, he had ignited the spark of transformation not just within the boardroom, but within himself, a promising moment that could shift the course of his career. The next steps ahead remained uncertain and daunting, but clarity was dawning. Jack wasn't merely preparing to change education, he was forging his identity as a leader. As resolved murmurs filled the room following his proclamation, Jack sensed the tide turning towards alignment. Would he find the same courage to face the inevitable challenges outside the boardroom? With a deep breath, he felt a swell of conviction. If this was the crucible for his identity, he was more than ready to face the flames. The clock continued ticking, but now, the sound reflected a heartbeat of opportunity rather than dread. And deep within, Jack understood the moment for confrontation was approaching. How he would respond when that moment arrived would define not just the future of his initiative, but the very foundation of who he was becoming. Jack stepped out of the boardroom, the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed in his mind. The conversations he'd just had replayed like an electric pulse, his heart still racing from the adrenaline of both the challenge and the tentative affirmation he'd received. The board's cautious optimism was a fragile thing, but it had ignited a spark within him. He was ready to delve deeper into the confrontation he had initiated, not just with the board, but with himself. Navigating the hallway, Jack felt the weight of expectation pressing down. Each step resonated with a new determination, a people-centered vision that demanded he not only lead but listen. He stopped at a large window overlooking the campus, the students below bustling around, chatting with each other, unconcerned with his internal turmoil. They were the heartbeat of his mission, the embodiment of empowerment he yearned to cultivate. Shifting his focus from their carefree laughter to his own reflection, he considered the distance he'd traveled in the past few weeks. Remembering days when apprehension ruled him, he felt compelled to confront his inner critic, the voice that whispered doubts and inadequacies. Could he truly be the advocate these students needed? And more unsettling, Could he withstand the impending scrutiny from parents who might resist this vision? Determined to quell his fears, he turned to his next move. "I will prepare myself," he muttered, stirring a steadfast sense of purpose. He would gather insights from both faculty and students to strengthen his upcoming discussions with parents. Responses to misconceptions and fears would empower him, but more importantly, he would equip others with the ability to articulate their experiences and aspirations. Jack's mind raced with ideas for student-led forums and materials that could help articulate the vision to skeptical parents. As he wandered back to his office, an unexpected weight settled in his chest, a blend of responsibility and vulnerability. It became evident that advocating for change made him vulnerable to opposition, and navigating these waters would require agility and authenticity. He had to face parents not merely as an administrator but as someone who truly inhabited the student experience. Their concerns were to be acknowledged, not dismissed, and he needed to cultivate understanding, not defensiveness. His phone chimed, breaking through his contemplative trance. It was a message from Lisa, his most trusted colleague. "Can we chat? I have some ideas about how to engage parents directly. I think it's crucial." The sincerity in the words set off a ripple of gratitude. She was on his side, ready to dive into this challenge with him. Meeting her would allow him to brainstorm strategies together, pooling their insights to navigate parent engagement. Yet the thought of that meeting unearthed fresh tension. The conversation would demand clarity in his vision, a meticulous articulation of his proposals. Before heading to the faculty lounge, Jack paused at his desk, heart racing, fingers hovering over the keyboard. He drafted bullet points, key themes he wanted to discuss: transparency, collaboration, empowerment. His mind spun with the implications of these encounters. Would he be able to open a conversation that invites apprehensive parents into a dialogue rather than a debate? Would they listen to his conviction, or would he face a barrage of skepticism? Rubbing his temples, he inhaled deeply, trying to diffuse the bubbling tension. It was a tightrope walk, not just with the board, not just with the students, but now with parents who held strong views about education and their children. The idea of failure gnawed at him, its claws digging into his resolve. He could hear a distant echo, the very voices he feared. Yet, hadn't he already stepped into the fray? Each breath rekindled the strength of his commitment. As he entered the lounge, Lisa awaited, a conspiratorial smile lighting her face. "Ready to take on the world?" she teased, but Jack sensed her genuine enthusiasm. He joined her at the table, their conversation starting light but quickly deepening as they shared thoughts and strategies. Together, they dissected the fears of parents he'd encountered. Each concern presented an opportunity to weave in understanding and demonstrate the benefits of their initiative. With collaborative openness, Jack began to outline how they would approach this challenge not merely as educators, but as partners in fostering the heart of education. "Jack," Lisa interjected, a probing tone to her voice, "what's your biggest hesitation right now? I know you want to empower, but what about your own fears?" He paused, contemplating her question, aware that any revelation would demand a degree of vulnerability he hadn't fully embraced yet, but hesitation slipped away as he uttered, "It's about being perceived as not just a visionary but a competent leader too. What if I can't live up to that expectation?" It felt liberating to voice the insecurity, and Lisa's supportive nod bolstered him. The meeting would be a litmus test not just for their initiative, but for the leader he was striving to become. As they delved further into their planning, an idea sparked: a potential parent workshop, a platform for dialogue rather than a presentation. It would allow parents to voice concerns while Jack and Lisa would illuminate the vision, promoting a collaborative spirit. But a lingering question gnawed at Jack: could he maintain the momentum when faced with the full force of skepticism? The realization came crashing in, a dizzying prospect. The true test of his resolve was merely hours away. Would he rise to the occasion, or would fear constrain him when he needed to lead the most? The contours of his future crystallized in his mind. They were filled with uncertainty, anxiety, yet shimmering hope. As the sun began to set, illuminating the room with hues of orange and gold, he felt renewed energy surge within. He was not just on the precipice of confrontation, He was forging a path forward, a critical moment on his journey toward becoming the leader he aspired to be, and as tomorrow loomed closer, Jack's heart thrummed with a question of its own: would he possess the courage to transform fear into the very momentum he needed? The next morning, Jack woke with the first rays of sunlight filtering through his window, flooding the room with warm light. He lay still for a moment, contemplating the day ahead. The looming workshop felt like a solid wall placed before him. Each detail weighed heavily, compressing his chest. He rolled out of bed, determination pooling in his gut. Today wasn't just another routine obligation. It was a turning point. That eye in the shower, the cascading water blurred his thoughts into steam. He could vividly recall the contours of the concerns parents had voiced: academic pressures, future job markets, social dynamics. Each one lingered in his mind like a distant echo. They exemplified the conflicting fears he, himself, had navigated as an educator. The familiar doubt crept in, threatening to upend his resolve. Would his information truly resonate, or would it deepen the chasm of misunderstanding? As he dressed, his mind wandered to the students' faces, filled with dreams. Jack clung to that vision, layering it over his apprehension like armor. Empowering students meant confronting parents with solid, relatable anecdotes and a clear vision, a tapestry of success stories and data that would reflect the merits of their endeavors. He was ready to dismantle the narratives of fear with honesty and transparency. Reaching for his notes, he ran his fingers over the bullet points he and Lisa had crafted. Words like transparency, collaboration, and empowerment flashed before him. They surged against his anxiety, promoting a fierce commitment to knitting together the fabric of community support. At the office, he took a moment to breathe deeply, focusing on the essence of why he was doing this. As he collected his thoughts and prepared materials, Lisa's presence fulfilled him with reassurance. When they met, the familiar spark of camaraderie ignited ideas that flowed between them seamlessly. However, even with her support, a nagging voice within whispered that the real challenge loomed large. He was the one who had to articulate the message. As the clock inched closer to the meeting time, he paced. The realization struck him: a moment of vulnerability could very well transform into strength. What if I see these parents not as opponents to persuade, but as allies to invite into the conversation? He whispered to himself. The approach had the potential to transform the dialogue from one of contention into collaboration. Minutes before the workshop began, he stood at the front of the room, watching as parents entered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Jack's breathing quickened as he anticipated the moment of truth. Each familiar face added a layer of weight. Their expectations were palpable, their concerns evident. He took a step forward, glancing down at his notes before glancing back at the faces. The room buzzed with low murmurs, like an electric current of tension. Jack reached deeper into himself. He was no longer just a facilitator. He was a bridge, a vessel carrying not only information but also the voices and aspirations of the students he championed. With a careful inhale, he initiated the dialogue. Thank you all for coming. Today, I hope we can share thoughts, concerns, and hopes for our students together, he began, feeling a steady rhythm in his heartbeat as he glanced at Lisa, who offered a nod of encouragement. I want this time to be about collaboration, not conflict. Let us harness our collective insights to explore how we can work hand in hand for our children's futures. As he spoke their language, he could feel a shift. Whispers transformed into attentive silence. Jack addressed the first concern raised, weaving in student testimonials, ethical intentions, and future pathways that would emerge from the new direction. Each positive story acted as a ladder, climbing above the weight of doubt, but just as momentum began to build, a voice dissected the room's energy. How can we trust this new approach when previous initiatives have faltered? A parent's question sliced through the air like a blade, sharp, direct. Challenging. Jack paused. Doubt surged again, creeping into his thoughts, but he didn't shy away. That's a valid concern, he said, inviting them deeper into his thought process. Trust is built with transparency and accountability. I want to hear your reservations, and together, let us forge a path forward. In that moment, a flicker of connection sparked between him and the audience. But the question remained, Was he prepared to continue this dialogue and face the uncomfortable truths that might emerge? As the workshop unfolded, Jack could see the dance of fear and understanding playing out before him, forcing him to confront not only the challenges of leadership but also the vulnerabilities that lay in reaching hearts and minds alike. The first step had been taken, he felt invigorated. Yet the stakes were growing higher with every moment. He realized that while he had initiated dialogue today, the deeper confrontation with entrenched beliefs was only just beginning. And as he navigated through the dynamic exchange, a single thought echoed squarely in his mind: how far was he willing to go to transform opposition into partnership? Would he really be able to reshape narratives, redefine expectations, and invoke a sense of shared purpose? A rush of adrenaline filled him. He had stepped into the storm, and the true test of his resolve was still unfolding before him. As Jack stood before the gathering of parents, the air thick with anticipation, he felt the weight of every conversation he'd ever had echoing through his mind. He was no longer just a history teacher, he was a fierce advocate for change, and the ensuing dialogue was his proving ground. Focused, he recalled the samurai's ideals, reminding himself that resilience and respect were crucial, especially now that as the questions and concerns began to flow. He welcomed each comment, treating them as bridges rather than barriers. With each inquiry, he found a renewed vigor within himself. Trust is built together, he assured the room, honing in on the idea that their partnership would redefine education for their children. The potential for collaborative power ignited a spark in Jack. It was not about just his vision but about sharing ownership of that vision with the broader community. Let's discuss how we can ensure transparency, he urged, tapping into the parents' apprehensions, offering to create regular community forums where progress and challenges could be reviewed openly. Parents nodded, their expressions transforming from skepticism to intrigue. The dam of doubt cracked, and conversations began to flow at a grassroots level. Then came a heartfelt parent testimonial. A mother shared how her son had struggled with conformity in a rigid educational structure. As she spoke of how the samurai virtues resonated with her child, a collective energy surged in the room that Jack could almost physically feel. Jack seized that moment, realizing that each voice represented a transformative opportunity. This initiative isn't merely about pedagogy, he articulated passionately, it's about instilling courage, active engagement, and resilience in our children. Together we can guide them to become adaptable thinkers prepared for the world beyond graduation. The room buzzed with a shared understanding. In that moment, Jack noticed a shift. The parents began to share their experiences, building a community narrative that celebrated the brilliance of unheard voices. He listened intently, nodding with appreciation as personal stories echoed his own fears and aspirations. His path transitioned from that of solitary confrontation to a shared journey, confronting fears about the future together. Hours passed like moments, each exchange solidifying Jack's confidence. Those once heavy with apprehension were now lifted, rekindled by possibility. By the end of the workshop, it was evident, a tangible transformation had occurred not just in the meeting room, but within him. He had fully committed to advocating not for himself but alongside the very families whose trust he aimed to earn. Walking out, the sun shone through the windows, casting warm light on a promising new horizon. As he greeted Lisa in the hallway, relief washed over him. "I really think we made progress today," she enthused. Jack smiled, feeling the authenticity radiating through both of them. Their conversation had shifted from theory to reality, from doubt to affirming purpose. Weeks later, as Jack reflected on parent input blending with student stories and exciting workshops, he gazed out at a classroom filled with eager learners embracing a curriculum rich with narratives that honored their experiences. Each lesson wove together autonomy and empowerment, transforming his teaching identity from one of a historian to a facilitator of growth. The curriculum had evolved, Jack had grown alongside it. In a recent school board meeting, he stood confidently before his colleagues, showcasing the positive feedback from parents and students alike. An impressive series of metrics validated the initiative. Enrollment has increased, attendance is up, and most importantly, our students are thriving, he declared, showcasing tangible results of their collaborative efforts. External validation underscored the internal evolution he had achieved. Solid confidence as an educator and respected leader, Jack had not only conquered his doubts but also transformed from a history teacher seeking validation into a visionary shaping the futures of his students. He had established himself as an unwavering advocate for their journeys marked by courage, resilience, and authenticity that he walked out of the meeting, a renewed sense of fulfillment coursing through him. Jack understood it would always require growth, but there was a reassuring stability in knowing he was on the right path. Every challenge he faced was now an opportunity for deeper connections, reinforcing the value of transparency and collaboration even after every storm. This was not merely the end of a battle, it was a realization of his vision, where the adversities had molded him into a teacher recognized for competence and integrity. With his students' narratives celebrated and their futures brightened, he felt like he had laid the foundation for an educational transformation that had only just begun. A renaissance of hope and inspiration flourishing in the corridors of the school he had once feared becoming lost within. Now, as the bell rang and students rushed out, Jack paused, basking in the genuine joy of their laughter, the sound flourishing like newfound freedom. The challenge was never meant to be a solitary journey. It had been about embracing the voices around him. He had proven to himself that true education encompasses the courage to evolve, inspire, and ignite passion. Jack Thompson was ready for whatever came next. Remember, if you found this journey inspiring, don't wait even one more second to act. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and help us reach more people who need to hear these messages. Comment below your reactions and thoughts about this transformation. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. True fans of personal growth and overcoming challenges understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions. This is the moment to show your support.